The speaker simply has remained non-committal and indifferent. The plaque is actually completed. It's ready to be put up. We can show it again. It's not as big as this poster, but it's the smallest token of recognition and honor that we should be able to extend to the Capitol officers.
The morning light filtered through the tall windows of the Capitol, casting long shadows across the marble floors where democracy had nearly died. Jamie Raskin stood in the hallway, his weathered face etched with the kind of exhaustion that comes not from sleepless nights but from witnessing the unthinkable. His fingers traced the empty wall space where a bronze plaque should have been mounted months ago. The plaque existed. He had seen it himself, polished bronze, engraved with the names of officers who had bled to save their lives on January 6th. Yet here in the very building those officers had defended, the wall remained bare. Raskin pulled out his phone, scrolling through the congressional record. March 15th, 2022. The date Congress had unanimously passed the resolution to honor the Capitol Police with a memorial plaque. March 15th, 2023, the deadline. Now it was well past that date and still nothing. His assistant approached, clipboard in hand, voice hushed in the reverent silence of the Capitol corridors. Congressman, the Speaker's office says they're still reviewing placement options. Raskin's jaw tightened. Reviewing placement options. For 15 months. And what about the plaque itself? Completed. Has been for months. It's sitting in storage. The words hung in the air like an accusation. Somewhere in the bowels of this building, a tribute to heroism gathered dust, while the heroes themselves tried to heal from wounds both physical and psychological. Officer Hodges, whose face had been crushed in a door. Officer Fanone, who had suffered a heart attack from being tasered. Officer Gonal, whose hand would never fully function again. Their names were etched in bronze, but their sacrifice was being buried in bureaucracy. Raskin walked toward the committee room, his footsteps echoing against the marble. The weight of institutional memory pressed down on him. This building had seen Civil War, world wars, constitutional crises. But it had never seen its own guardians honored with such calculated indifference. The Judiciary Committee room buzzed with the familiar tension of partisan warfare. Camera lights illuminated the long table where representatives sat like opposing armies, their battle lines drawn in the space between leather chairs and polished wood. Jim Jordan adjusted his tie, his signature intensity already brewing behind his eyes. He had built his career on controlled fury, on the ability to turn any hearing into a spectacle of righteous indignation. Today would be no different. "The gentleman from Ohio is recognized," came the chairman's voice. Jordan leaned into his microphone, his voice carrying the practiced rhythm of a man who had mastered the art of political theater. "Mr. Chairman, I find it rich, absolutely rich, that we're sitting here talking about supporting law enforcement when the other side of the aisle spent years calling to defund the police." He gestured broadly, his movements sharp and deliberate. Where was this concern for our officers when cities were burning? Where was this outrage when they wanted to slash police budgets across America? The Republican side of the room nodded in synchronized approval. It was a familiar dance, this deflection from accountability to accusation. Jordan's voice rose slightly, hitting the cadence that made cable news clips. "The Republican Party has always backed the blue. We don't pick and choose when to support law enforcement based on political convenience. Raskin watched from across the table, his fingers drumming silently against the wood. The irony was so thick, it seemed to fill the room like smoke. He had given Jordan the opening he needed, the chance to perform his greatest hits of moral superiority. But Raskin had come prepared. "Mr. Chairman, I yield myself time to respond to the gentleman from Ohio." Raskin's voice carried a different quality, quieter, more measured, but with an undercurrent that suggested dangerous waters ahead. "The gentleman speaks of backing the blue, and I appreciate that sentiment. I truly do. But I have a question." He paused, letting silence build tension. "If we back the blue, if we never forget their sacrifice, then why is the plaque honoring the Capitol Police officers who saved our lives on January 6th still sitting in storage?" Jordan's expression flickered just for a moment, but the cameras caught it. The plaque that Congress authorized, the plaque that was completed months ago, the plaque that commemorates officers who were beaten, crushed, and tasered while protecting this very building and everyone in it. The room shifted. Republican staffers began whispering urgently into phones. Democratic members leaned forward, sensing blood in the water. Jordan recovered quickly, his voice taking on the tone of wounded righteousness. "Mr. Chairman, I object to the gentleman's characterization. The Speaker's office has indicated that appropriate placement is being reviewed." For 15 months, Raskin interrupted, his voice sharp enough to cut glass. Officer Hodges had his face crushed in a door on January 6th. Officer Fanone suffered a heart attack from being tasered. Officer Gonell's hand may never fully function again. How long do their families have to wait for this institution to acknowledge their sacrifice? The silence that followed was deafening. Jordan's mouth opened, but no words came. The practiced deflections, the reliable talking points, none of them fit this moment. "I'll ask again." Raskin continued, his voice now carrying the full weight of moral authority. "If we back the blue, why are we burying their honor?" The morning after the hearing, Raskin's office hummed with the energy of a campaign war room. Phones rang constantly, reporters called for comments, and cable news played the confrontation on loop. But Raskin's attention was focused on a single piece of paper that had appeared on his desk overnight. The letterhead read, "Office of the Speaker," in official font. The date was 3 weeks old. The recipient was the House Republican Conference Chair, and the contents made Raskin's blood run cold. "Regarding the Capitol Police Memorial Plaque, recommend indefinite postponement of installation. Visible reminders of 1/6 events remain politically problematic ahead of midterm elections. Suggest alternative commemoration methods that avoid direct visual association with the incident." The signature was barely legible, but the implication was crystal clear. The plaque wasn't delayed by bureaucracy, it was being actively suppressed. Raskin read the memo 3 times, his anger building with each pass. They weren't just failing to honor the officers, they were afraid to honor them. The same people who wrapped themselves in the flag and claimed to support law enforcement were terrified of a simple bronze plaque because it might remind voters of the truth. He picked up his phone and dialed the committee chairman. "We need an emergency hearing." 2 days later, the committee room was packed beyond capacity. Word had leaked that Raskin had explosive new evidence, and the press gallery overflowed with reporters. Jordan sat at the witness table, his usual confidence noticeably dimmed. "Mr. Chairman, Raskin began holding up the leaked memo. "I'd like to submit this document for the record." Jordan's face went pale. His staff began frantic whispering. "This is an internal memo from the Speaker's office dated 3 weeks ago regarding the Capitol Police Memorial Plaque. I'll read the relevant portion. Recommend indefinite postponement of installation. Visible reminders of 1/6 events remain politically problematic ahead of midterm elections." The room erupted. Democrats demanded recognition to speak. Republicans called for points of order. Cameras clicked rapidly, capturing every reaction. Raskin's voice cut through the chaos. "Mr. Jordan, you testified that the Republican Party always backs the blue, but this memo suggests your leadership is afraid of a plaque honoring officers who were beaten defending this building. How do you reconcile that?" Jordan's face flushed red, his trademark intensity now directed at damage control. "Mr. Chairman, that memo, if it's authentic, doesn't represent my views or the views of the Republican Conference. We honor our law enforcement officers every day." "Then why isn't there a plaque on the wall?" "There are procedural considerations. For 15 months, the gentleman is politicizing tragedy." Jordan shot back, his voice rising to match his reputation. "He's using the pain of these officers for political gain." Raskin leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more force than shouting. "Mr. Jordan, I was in this building on January 6th. I watched officers bleed. I heard their screams. I saw them carried away on stretchers. The only person politicizing their pain is the person who thinks their sacrifice is too politically problematic to acknowledge." The silence that followed was absolute. Jordan's mouth worked soundlessly, his usual arsenal of deflections suddenly useless against the weight of documented truth. "Your party praises the blue." Raskin continued, his voice now carrying the full weight of moral judgment, "until their pain threatens your power." The final hearing was scheduled for a quiet Thursday afternoon, the kind of session that usually attracted only C-SPAN cameras and policy wonks. But word had spread through Washington's political underground that Raskin was planning something unprecedented. The committee room filled slowly like a theater, before a performance everyone knew would be historic. Jordan sat at the witness table, his usual bluster replaced by the tense alertness of a man who knew he was walking into an ambush. Raskin took his position at the microphone, a folder of papers in front of him. He looked tired, the kind of bone-deep exhaustion that comes from fighting institutional indifference. But his voice, when it came, was steady. "Mr. Chairman, I'd like to read something into the record." He opened the folder, revealing a list of names. Simple black text on white paper, but each name carried the weight of sacrifice. Officer Brian Sicknick died of multiple strokes after being attacked with chemical spray on January 6th. The room went silent. Cameras focused on Raskin's face, capturing the gravity of the moment. Officer Caroline Edwards suffered a traumatic brain injury when rioters pushed her down concrete steps. Jordan shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Several Republican members looked away from the cameras. Officer Michael Fanone suffered a heart attack after being tasered repeatedly by the mob. Raskin's voice never wavered, but the pain was evident in his eyes. He had known these officers, had shaken their hands, had looked into their faces as they recovered from their wounds. Officer Daniel Hodges. His face was crushed in a door as he tried to prevent the mob from entering the building. The silence in the room was complete now. Even the reporters had stopped typing, caught up in the weight of the moment. Officer Aquilino Gonell. His hand was so severely injured that he may never regain full function. Raskin looked up from the list, his eyes finding Jordan's across the table. These are the names on the plaque, Mr. Jordan. The plaque that your leadership considers too politically problematic to display. These are the officers whose sacrifice your party claims to honor, but whose memorial you're afraid to hang. Jordan's face had gone ashen. The cameras captured every micro-expression, every sign of discomfort. I have one more document to share. Raskin continued, pulling out another sheet of paper. This is a revised timeline from the Speaker's office dated last week. It shows that the plaque installation has been moved from under review to postponed indefinitely. The revelation hit the room like a physical blow. It wasn't just delay, it was active suppression. So, let me ask you directly, Mr. Jordan. How do you back the blue while burying the plaque that honors them? Jordan's mouth opened, but no words came. The practiced deflections, the reliable talking points, the righteous indignation, none of it worked when confronted with the simple truth of names and sacrifice. You said you'd never forget them. Raskin continued, his voice now carrying the full weight of moral authority. But even their plaque scares you. The hearing ended in chaos. Jordan left without answering the question. Republican members filed out in silence. The press gallery erupted in a frenzy of phone calls and urgent typing. But Raskin remained seated, staring at the list of names in front of him. The weight of institutional memory pressed down on him. This building had seen civil war, world wars, constitutional crises. But it had never seen its own guardians honored with such calculated indifference. An hour later, when the cameras were gone and the reporters had filed their stories, Raskin walked alone through the Capitol corridors. He stopped at the empty wall space where the plaque should have been mounted, the same spot where he had stood months earlier. From his briefcase, he pulled out a simple printed list, the same names he had read in the hearing. He placed it carefully on the floor, leaning it against the wall where bronze should have been. Officer Brian Sicknick, Officer Caroline Edwards, Officer Michael Fanone, Officer Daniel Hodges, Officer Aquilino Gonell. The names stood in stark contrast to the empty wall, a testament to the gap between rhetoric and reality, between claimed values and actual behavior. Raskin stepped back, his weathered face reflecting the weight of the moment. The building around him held the echoes of democracy's greatest moments and its darkest hours. Today it held something else, the silence of institutional cowardice. He turned toward the camera that had been following him, his eyes carrying the fatigue of a man who had seen too much and fought too long. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, but carried the authority of truth. They tell us we must never forget. But they've chosen to forget these names, these faces, these sacrifices. They've chosen to forget because remembering would require acknowledging what happened here. And acknowledging what happened here would require confronting who was responsible. He paused, looking back at the list of names on the floor. A plaque is just bronze and brass, but what it represents the willingness to honor sacrifice, to remember truth, to stand by those who stood for us. That's what democracy looks like. And when we refuse to hang it, when we bury it in bureaucracy and fear, we're not just failing these officers, we're failing the very idea that this building is supposed to represent. The camera held on his face for a long moment, capturing the weight of institutional betrayal and personal resolve. Even if they hide the plaque, he said finally, they can't bury the truth. He walked away, leaving the list of names against the empty wall, a paper memorial to officers whose bronze memorial remained buried in the politics of denial. The Capitol corridors echoed with his footsteps, empty except for the ghosts of January 6th and the promise that their story would not be forgotten, no matter how many walls remained bare. In the days that followed, the leaked memos would be investigated. The plaque would eventually be hung, but only after months more of public pressure. The officers' names would be read into the congressional record dozens of times. But the question Raskin asked that day, how do you back the blue while burying their honor, would echo through the halls of power long after the cameras stopped rolling. Democracy, it turned out, was not just about the big moments of crisis. It was about the small moments of choice, the decision to hang a plaque or leave a wall bare, the choice to remember or to forget, the courage to honor sacrifice even when it's politically inconvenient. And in those small moments, the true character of institutions and the people who lead them is revealed.